They called it Salt Point, though it was mostly water pretending to be land. The marsh breathed, with the tide and the rice nodded like parishioners too obedient to look up. The house looked over it all as if sternness could dry a field. Clara Barrow learned the gates, and the hour's water changed its mind because the tides kept truer time than her marriage. Horace liked to say, God owned the marsh, but his pen owned the paper. She learned to keep laudanum in a pretty bottle and grief in a drawer. His name was Malachi, and the planks kept his thumbprints the way a soul keeps a secret. He made Cypress obey him without humiliation. When he looked up, his eyes did not apologize for being eyes. Horace came back from Charleston, bragging that Rice was the gentlest slave he'd ever owned. Behind him came his brother Ephraim with a smile like a moneylender's thumb. They walked to the yard tallying men and got together. Clara taught letters to the house children on Sundays because idleness gave men ideas about a wife's head. Malachi drifted close with a broken bench, not taking a seat, listening as she traced Providence on slate. When she handed him a psalm to hold, his thumb smudged a margin that refused to clean. Desire is a gate that lets water through even when you swear you shut it. She fainted when the heat demanded theater and he caught her without dropping his hat. Her palm stayed on his for a heartbeat longer than sense. At supper, Horace told his favorite story about a man made to know his place, carving pigeon pie-like punishment. Clara watched his throat swallowing his righteousness. Later, she listened to boots measure the hall, and names measured like sugar. Ephraim admired Malachi, openly the way a hunter admires a stag. He is clever, he said, and smiled at his brother over a ledger line. The steward coughed into his sleeve, reading numbers that meant flesh moving. The sale took place 12 feet from a magnolia that smelled cleaner than anything that day deserved. Ephraim's hand found Malachi's shoulder where a man's bones make good levers. Horace signed his name as if redeeming something that had not been lost. Clara stood at an upstairs window and let the fan make little circles that shooed nothing away. Malachi looked up at the square of shade that held her and did not stop walking. She held the square steady and wished glass would fog. They took him out by the delivery gate, like a package. No shouting, because cruelty loves an orderly room. Clara went to the nursery and folded the same blanket until her thumbs were wood. 2 days later, she dismissed the driver early and walked into town with her shawl low. Behind the counting house, the stable smelled like men hiding from their day. Malachi stood with a rope on his wrists like courtesy. I will buy you, she said. Voga, because there was no other language Power would heed. I have family things I could sell. Hope embarrassed them both. If you buy me, I am yours, he said, and the word yours made the stable tilt. If you buy me, I am still in your house. He shook his head like a man tasting temptation and spitting before it dissolved. Ephraim came with a hat to Jaunty, for the price of anyone's heart. Providence arranges meetings, he said, watching Clara's face as if it owed him. He named a date, named a reaver, named himself, the end of the sentence. Clara went home and woke before gulls to vomit quietly into a basin. The doctor pronounced a blessing, as men do when the burden is not theirs. Horace kissed her hairline because property passes best with affection. She delivered in August while vinegar fought air and midwives muttered into their sleeves. The baby cried like someone with a contract. His hair curled tight like marsh in November and his eyes were not Horace's. Horace named him Thomas the way Barrow men always did. Ephraim lifted the blanket, smiled with one corner of his mouth, and let the cloth fall. Later he told Clara she would not send that boy away ere, he said, like saying amen. That night Clara wrote to God and whoever finds this because propriety was done being useful. I have done wrong and kindness, and they are twins in this place, she wrote. A man I should not have loved was sold from my sight. I confess the boy in that cradle belongs to the wrong kingdom, she wrote. Ink crawling when tears insisted to be counted. If this is found when I am dirt, let it burn what it touches. She folded it into a pillowcase. Too near and not near enough. A priva, Ephraim said Malachi to build a smokehouse, because men who eat well forget wood has to come from someone's hands. He sent meat to Salt Point with a story about Malachi's excellence, a taunt wrapped in grease. Horace bragged as if his mouth could make anything true. An oysterman carried a stick scratched with a bird and a line through it. Clara read it as tried, failed, will not try again this way. She sent back an indigo scarf. Ephraim took it from the messenger and put it in his pocket like proof he could steal even color. Horace coughed himself into long afternoon sleeps with a ledger on his chest. Rumor said Ephraim had lost heavily at a table where every man was colonel until proven otherwise. To pay the loss, he would sell men further south, to Sugar, where life burns fast and sweet. Clara stood in the doorway of Ruth's cabin at twilight. The hour women pinned shirts and words. "What would you do?" she asked, the baby breathing frog fast against her. Ruth looked at the water and said, "Put fire where men hide paper." She took a lamp to the gin house, because fear has a taste, and it tastes like smoke. The match made a small sun, and then a larger one. Men ran as if racing the truth. Ephraim pulled Malachi's sale paper from his breast as if flame respected legalities. He clenched his jaw and chewed it, because some men think eating a thing proves you own it. The gin house did not fall. It learned her name. 3 days later, Malachi boarded a riverboat with a name that promised more than water ever keeps. Night came like an accomplice. He went over the side the way impossible men do, silent, precise, a prayer with hands. The shot cracked, and the river accepted something bright. Hooks dragged for testimony, not salvation. They brought up a hat and a curse that sounded like Ephraim's laugh. The story slicked downriver to Salt Point. Clara laid her hand on the baby's chest and matched his breath because that was a job she could still do. Ruth stood in the doorway and cried without making a sound. Horace died as if absence were the last favor he could grant. Men came with hats and condolences mixed in their pockets. Under coverture, everything Clara could name slid into Ephraim's hands like silverware. She took back what could not be repossessed, the right to write. She listed births, whippings, weddings. Men refused to call that broken hands, broken laws. She wrote, "Use this as tinder if nothing else will burn." She wrote to Malachi, "Though letters cannot cross water, the dead sleep under. If you live, live far and loud. If you are gone, hear me." She scratched, "I let you be taken because I was slow to burn." Clara tucked pages behind the portrait of Horace's mother, where men hide secrets so they can admire them. Archives begin where a woman refuses to bury truth inside herself, she said to the empty room. The air felt more expensive after. Ephraim called himself master in the yard until the word rang for him. He replaced the overseer with a man who liked to make a sound before hitting. He kept torches close at hand because rumor said Moses was plying creeks with a skiff. Clara pressed a key into a boy's palm and told him where it fit. She gave Ruth a book of remedies and a glance that meant more. The quarters murmured like an audience rehearsing the speech they would give when called. Fever took the county like a sheriff, too fond of his job. Clara's throat burned and her joints talked ugly. Ruth sang a tune from before America thought itself a finished sentence. Ephraim sent a note upstairs, arithmetic and malice braided. Sugar wanted bodies, and he had lists. He did not come in person because fever respects no ledger. Clara's hand shook, and she kept writing, because the only way to stop heat is to use it. "Look under the east stair for a tin of coin," she wrote. "Spend it on anyone who can read this. Let it be written that Ephraim Barrow made of Malachi paper," she wrote, denying him even the serpent's dignity. "Let it be known I struck the match at the gin house. I do not repent, I only regret it did not rise higher. Thomas's father did not own me," she wrote, the nib tearing where the truth snagged. "No one owns the first eyes that meet you grateful. If the town must spit to right a wrong, spit and be done." Rain came hard enough to make the roof honest. For one night she slept without biting her lip to keep silence. In the morning her eyes were clear and the world less so. She wrote the last lines with a steadiness that felt like walking into a fire on purpose. "Forgive me only if forgiveness is cheap. If it costs anything, keep it. Use what I know to box a man smarter than me." Ruth sealed the packet with wax. A small drama, exactly right for what was in it. They hid it, and then Ruth took it back out again because hiding is not the same as record. She carried it down to the courthouse, tied up in laundry and nerve. The clerk had seen Grief try every trick and fail, but he hadn't seen this heat. He opened the packet and forgot his coffee. The words behaved like embers, even in cursive. He slid the pages into a docket marked Estetsboro, because fire finds what it needs. The wax broke like a heart. Being honest. He pressed his thumb to a line and hissed when it stung. Bluecoats came down like a season that had finally made up its mind. Ephraim fired a pistol into air and hit nothing that could bleed. Women with bright eyes walked to the quarters as if they had been waiting to midwife this. Ruth moved hands into hands, and the gate key found its lock. Boats rose on tide like they were smiling. The marsh kept quiet, because silence sometimes cheers loudest. The portrait of Horace's mother came off the wall and cracked its pretend dignity. The house let doors hang open because polite habits die last. Ephraim went west, men said, and lost the part of himself that could be looked in the eye. Years make their own roads, whether anyone deserves them. Thomas grew into his father's mouth and his mother's stubborn way of taking in air. He came to the courthouse and asked for anything in his mother's hand. The clerk brought out the docket with the burned corner and the singing heat. He laid the pages down like a prayer book for people with no use for prayers. Thomas touched the edge and did not lift it right away. He read, "Use what I know, and I loved you in the wrong order, and do nots, and fire." And the room rearranged itself to make space for him. He leaned into the counter as if words weighed more than men said. He went from there to the river, because a river is where answers refuse to lie. He stood where Tide keeps saying the same thing and getting away with it. He said his mother's name and a man's name he had never been given permission to use. The wind brought back marsh and heat and a sweetness he could not name. They had burned what could burn. Ginhouse letters, Maris's and the archive, kept the ash like fuel. On slow days, the clerk took out the docket and let the heat kiss his thumb. He always flinched and always smiled after. If Malachi lived, he lived wickedly free beyond the counting of men like Ephraim, where names are given by friends and not by ledgers. If he died, he did not die politely. Either way, a page with his name on it keeps warming the careful men who touch it. Clara's grave has no words, because the words she made are still working. The fig tree behind the house gives figs and keeps counsel. The tides continue, shrugging off, meaning doing their job like an older law. You can go in late afternoon and ask the clerk for old things and see if he likes your face. He will hesitate because old things love to be asked properly. He will lay the docket down and the heat will climb your fingers as if memory were aflame with manners. You will read a sentence that was never meant to find you and it will stubborn and right on time. You will leave with your hands smelling of smoke and iron and marsh. You will understand. Archives do not cool. Some truths burn on purpose. The mistress watched the man she loved be sold to a brother and did not forgive herself for breathing afterward. She wrote a letter that refused to die and put matchas where others put apologies. In a drawer in a poor county, the paper is still warm, as if her hand stays on it